The lack of recognition of Rusins in Subcarpathia and the hypocrisy of Ukraine that is presented with the situation is something that has been at the forefront of my mind as of late. Not just about the implications that present itself for Rusins, but on a more macro level look at Ukraine as a whole. You have on one hand this world media coverage of Ukraine supposedly calling for liberal values, democracy, the Euromaidan movement, all of this. Then on the other side, you have the outright refusal to recognize a large minority in your country, along with some of the most draconian language laws and attitudes towards their minorities that you see in Europe. Let us take the issue of Ukraine and Russia as a case of this hypocrisy. While this is multifaceted like all complex issues are, you can see the general argument from the Russian nationalist crowd. Whether it goes the route of Ukrainian being a regional identity at best, or simply a purely constructed national identity at worst, I would say much of this crowd would argue that Ukraine is an integral part to the Russian nation, and that having all been descended from the Kievan Rus, all East Slavs must stick together. This conveniently leaves out needing a warm water port, embarrassment following 1989, NATO nearing their borders, that I would argue play a greater effect on their decisions, but putting that aside. Many Ukrainians would argue, I think, that due to linguistic, cultural, historical, and self-determination, they are absolutely different from Russians, their own people. I give them this point. I 100% agree. In fact, I would say they are more different than many others who even believe that they are separate would realize in numerous aspects, especially in the Western areas. Now, we see how enraged they get when many Russians don't take their claims seriously, but fail to see how this situation is at all similar to Rusins in their own country. Why doesn't this apply to us as well if these people supposedly espouse these values for themselves? It is as if a mind virus has swept over the minds of many in the Ukrainian public to not see the enormous parallels between these situations. However much you want to sugarcoat the policy of the state, essentially the message Rusins are told is, shut up, you are Ukrainian, stay in line. In some cases, this is hilariously even worse than what Russians think of Ukrainians, in that at least you can be Ukrainian in Russia. No one will change your identity and say, no, you're Russian. In the Soviet Union, you could at least use that word Ukrainian on your passport. Not so for my fellow countrymen. You have this dichotomy where supposedly this state with their Euromaidan movement and push for liberal democracy is doing the same thing to a group in their own country that they speak out so much against when it's done to them. How, as a Rusin, am I supposed to take any of that progressive talk seriously? Anywhere I post anything where there is even a small subset of Ukrainians, I'm bombarded by messages and idiotic comments questioning my own validity, as if I can't decide who I am for myself. And this breaks the mainstream narrative even slightly, then this is somehow unforgivable, and I'm a puppet of Moscow. I mean, the things I've heard to discredit Rusins is simply hilarious in many cases. The one which I feel I genuinely lost some intelligence after hearing was this new Rusins argument about Rusins in Slovakia. As if one day these people appeared from nowhere and suddenly started identifying as such. Is this serious or an attempt to frankly dilute reality? I think we know which one it probably is. Then of course you have the Lviv language law from 2018, which bans all Russian media as if it was even a big deal there. I mean, come on. In Lviv, you were telling me Russian propaganda or even Russian media was a factor at all? What is the point of this? Except to further divide the country on ethnic and linguistic lines and grandstand about how much of a Ukrainian patriot you are. From the moment we joined Ukraine until now, we have never been recognized as a distinct people, even though the evidence is abundantly clear if you choose to look for it. And even after all this time, Subcarpathia, to a substantial degree, still sees themselves as different from Ukrainians. As much as Galician nationalists claim to differ, these claims, of course, often make me roll my eyes in contempt. Why all of a sudden have the tables flipped and all the things you supposedly fight for go out the window as soon as something that doesn't fit your mainstream nationalist agenda is spoken? At least be honest with yourselves and everyone else. If you, Ukraine, as a country, truly desire to stand for any of these principles, we would be recognized by now. But of course, it isn't about that, is it? Other minorities that have lived in their respective areas for 1,000 years be damned. I don't know how the situation in Ukraine will change over the next decade. It is a hope of mine that perhaps someday Ukrainians can look back and just see how hypocritical they are in regards to Rusins. But will this happen anytime soon? Well, we'll see.